CBC News has confirmed reports that were first in other media that show that some Conservative MPs have personal investments in Brookfield-related companies. Brookfield Asset Management is, of course, the company that Liberal Leader Mark Carney previously chaired, a role Conservatives have repeatedly attacked Carney over. Well, it turns out 6 Conservative MPs have disclosed that they hold stock in Brookfield or its subsidiaries, and that includes Melissa Lantsman, who as of 2024 held stocks in one of Brookfield's investment funds based in Bermuda. Lantsman, who is the deputy leader, has accused Carney and Brookfield of dodging taxes using those types of funds. So let's pick up there. Kate, I'm going to come to you first. So I'm sure you expected that. There's a tweet Melissa Lantsman put out on March 26th, where she said, Mark Carney dodged Canadian taxes using offshore tax havens while running Brookfield. Her own disclosures has her and her spouse investing in these very funds. Square this for me, if you can.
Yeah, listen, I think there is a big difference between holding investments and being the chair of the company at the time making use of these tax havens. That's not an apples to apples comparison, in my view. But I would say that it does highlight the importance of financial disclosure of elected officials. I would be a fan of more transparency there, pardon me, and Conservatives have called for that. And for me, this really underscores why Mr. Carney is not releasing his financial disclosures. If we're going to ask that of members of Parliament, and I think we should, if we're going to ask that of members of Parliament, should it not be incumbent on the potential Prime Minister of Canada to do the same, somebody who has had a far greater role in Brookfield's management than somebody who owns stock in the company?
But if it's unethical for Brookfield to set up these funds, which has been the Conservative argument, why is it ethical for the Conservative deputy leader and other members of caucus to invest in them?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I think that everybody needs to take a pretty good look at their finances and see exactly what is used in terms of, the practices and, the practices of these investment funds, a lot of whom make use of these, but I think it is unethical. And so if you are an elected member of Parliament, you should make sure that your investments and your stocks are with organizations that are paying their fair share of tax in Canada. Again, I think this is not an apples to apples thing. Somebody who holds stock is not the same as the man who was responsible for moving the headquarters south of the border or playing a very key role in the investment systems of these companies and the investment setup. So I think that there's not an apples to apples comparison, but more transparency is good. And I think that the point really should be, where's that transparency from Mr. Carney?
Well, if I can just go back. Those are allegations that you're suggesting in terms of the taxes. So let's just be clear on that. There's no suggestion that everybody isn't paying their fair share of taxes. And I suspect that Melissa Lantsman is actually paying her fair share of taxes on her investments for Brookfield.
So just to be clear, I'm saying that the company is responsible for is making use of tax havens.
They are making use of the taxes that Melissa Lantsman and Pierre Poilievre, I believe, too.
Well, no, Pierre Poilievre is in a group like a
he trusts Brookfield.
Vanguard fund.
He trusts Brookfield with other parts of it.
No, but he bought a fund. He bought units in a fund that broadly holds a bunch of Canadian companies, of which Brookfield is a part.
Okay.
But these are direct share purchases that Lantsman and Scott Reid and Scott Davidson and others have made.
Exactly. Okay, fair enough. But more to the point, it seems that all of these MPs, including the leadership of the Conservative Party, actually trust the company that Mark Carney was the chair of to manage their money. And so I think that that's, if anything, an endorsement of his economic prowess. And so I would be I would be a little chagrined if if it came back on me about what my actual holdings were. And it turns out to be with that company, that big company that I'm calling someone incapable of dealing with the economy of Canada. So I do appreciate that huge irony, and I'm sure that they are very embarrassed about being found out with that.
I don't know if they need to be embarrassed about anything. Again, I think the principle here, and something that Poilievre has committed to, is more transparency around these disclosures.
Yeah, I'm sure Mr. Carney is talking about that in all of the press statements and all of the questions
He's still refusing to make those disclosures.
No, that's not true in any way.
He hasn't disclosed his real estate holdings?
No, that is not true in any way. He has made every disclosure that was necessary of him.
That was necessary. That was necessary of him, only by the book, not what's actually morally right.
Okay, well, that's a big statement. Morally right.
It should not be for somebody who wants to be the Prime Minister of Canada.
Okay, so just for the audience, that he has divested his assets. There's two ways you can divest assets: sell them off or put them in a blind trust, right? When you're a public office holder in Canada, he has gone the blind trust route. The only assets Mr. Carney says he has direct control over are cash, his primary residence, a house here in Ottawa, and a cottage. That's what he says right now. Now, I know the allegation has been that there are maybe stock options and other things in Brookfield and all of these things that are showing up on the disclosure list of his opponents in this election. But Francoise, what I wonder is we've to this point litigated quite a bit about Carney disclosure and whether that needs to be changed. And he's complied with the law. And if people want to change the law, that's the thing. But this reminds me, I have a good friend back in St. John's named David McCarthy. He used to tell me that when you find yourself taking the moral high ground in an argument, you should throw yourself off because you probably don't belong there. And this is what I thought of today, that you're criticizing the actions of a company that you are investing in for your own personal financial gain while attacking it for political gain. I just feel like this becomes a real problem in the debates the next couple of nights if the Conservatives choose to go that route.
Definitely, it gives an out. I mean, in French we say, beware, if you spit in the air, it might fall right on your nose. Basically, that's the expression en français. It sounds better.
It's more lyrical in
French, but I did an automatic translation. And that's always the danger. I mean, when somebody takes that high moral ground and point the finger, gardez-vous une petite gêne. Just be a bit, and that may be the campaign, the problem of the Conservative campaign. They should have asked first, anybody's got anything in Brookfield? Please, if you're not sure, because sometimes you don't know, you don't follow this every day, and I'm suspecting that maybe she didn't know. I used to have funds before I transferred them, and it's like, I never check. I trusted my banker to do these things.
Just on that, these are direct purchases into the funds, and it's Brookfield Renewable, so it's a net zero
okay, well
one.
then,
and I looked it up online,
okay,
and it says
okay.
it is a Bermuda-based limited partnership. It's right there in the disclosure. So,
well, more reason to shut up and say, you know what, I'll pass my turn on this one. Take somebody else to do the attack dog thing there. At the same time, I think it's a reflection of us all, because in Quebec we have some retirement funds. La Caisse de dépôt et de placement are in Brookfield. Yeah. So I think when you're reduced to make those type of accusation, to try to bring down somebody, unless they are really fraudulent, committed a crime of some, if we're all anti-tax haven and so on, let's change the damn laws and stop just talking and saying this and that. Make it your first piece of legislation when you come back, and make sure that you're helping the companies to be proactive and fighting on the same ground as other corporations outside Canada, because there's all type of logic. I find this whole debate is just deterring the real problems that are in front of Canadians right now. But it's ironic when you have the person who points the finger and it comes right back at them. I mean, take a break, Melissa.
Sherelle, is this a spit in the air and it lands on your nose kind of moment, to butcher it in English? I mean,
it might be, and it's so common in politics, and you can think of so many examples of this exact type of thing. You think back, you don't have to go too far back to think about the Liberal housing policy that Conservative MPs were writing letters wanting the funding for their own communities, while at the same time, charging against the program in the House of Commons. And then I was thinking about, the whole, with the Trudeau and the whole Aga Khan Island thing. And, Rona Ambrose, as interim leader for the Conservatives at the time, she was, very quickly on this, but then she had to pull it right back because it was discovered, well, she was also spending her, her Christmas vacation on a yacht owned by somebody very, very wealthy. So it's, as Francois says, this is kind of what people don't like about politics.
That's it.
And everybody kind of says we want to see adults in the room. We want to see people be role models and leaders if they are going to be in these positions. And maybe that's, sounds a little too Pollyanna. But I do think that this is what turns people off.
Yeah.
And that is entirely the reason that we have these toxic political situations. People don't want to get involved because they are seeing this happen and they're going, well, I can't possibly make a mistake. I can't possibly, change my mind. I can't possibly do this, that, and the other, simply because they know they're going to be attacked for something that somebody else is probably doing at the same time.
So Kate, on that, when we reached out to the Conservatives, they came back with this shows the value of disclosure, right, which is the point you're making earlier. But the criticism has been these funds are unethical because they're offshore. So I need to get back to this. Why is it unethical to set it up but not unethical to invest in it? This is what I'm really struggling to square. And I didn't set this standard. I'm not creating a false standard. This is a standard that was set as a criticism of Mr. Carney that would suggest, because it's Melissa Lantzman, her spouse, Scott Reed, Scott Davidson, Stephen Ellis, Greg McLean, Cheryl Gallant, Marty Morantz, Ron Liebert's spouse, Kelly McCauley, but got rid of his in 2020. It's more than a few of them. And Mr. Poilievre, when he brought his investments back to a Canadian fund, I mean, you can't buy into a Canadian fund without buying into Brookfield. It's that big of a company in the Canadian economy. But why is this okay and not that?
Yeah, I think if you're going to make a commitment around tax havens and bringing more transparency to this, you have to be prepared to walk the walk yourselves. So that should have been done prior to that promise is what I would observe, so that situations like this are more easily navigated. But there's one party that is proposing to close this loophole. I think it has the support of the NDP. I think it has the support of the Bloc. It does not have the support of the Liberals. And there's a good question as to why.
Well, Michelle, why? Because I looked for examples of Mr. Poilievre talking about tax havens prior to this. And the only other time I could find it was when Mr. Bronfman, who's in charge of fundraising for the Liberals, his personal trust or family trust was also in a tax haven. So it became an attack point rather than, because the New Democrats are always talking about this. This is core principle for them, right? They have been talking about tax reform and cracking down on tax avoidance for a while. I don't get the sense Mr. Carney feels these are immoral options for corporations because he's enthusiastically used them and defended them as a way of creating value for shareholders and investors. What do you think happens with this in a Carney government should he win?
Well, I think that without question, he has been very clear that companies and Canadians should pay their fair share of taxes. And, corporations have to be able to compete and do business and try and get returns for, whether it's the Quebec Pension Fund or the Canadian Pension Fund or whoever their investors are. That's part of the role of a company, is to do the best by investors. And the role of government is to try and make sure that everybody is paying a fair share of taxes. And so, Mr. Poilievre has decided that this is a new horse to ride because he thought it was convenient. So he's picked up the reins for a second time. And now is probably going to drop them again because he's been found to have a number of caucus members who have actually bought into those very same funds that he's so stridently against for the moment. So, I think that it's not like they have a history of being on this issue all the time. I'm sure it would be something that everyone will look at in terms of are there loopholes to close, or is that just sometimes how some global businesses are conducting themselves? I think it's something that I remember my days at finance that you always looked at and always tried to tighten up, but it's not quite always so simple when you get into the kind of governmentese.
So, Francois, just in the context of this campaign, this has become a real issue because it is seen as a potential point of vulnerability to knock down the front runner. It seems that's what's driven it so much and why, the conduct of Brookfield and its organization of its corporate entities has been a focal point. I mean, do you get the sense that this is a burning issue in this campaign? Do you get the sense that whoever wins this needs to deal with these things? Because I think if you start messing around with this stuff, you're going to find a lot of corporate candidates are going to say, whoa, wait a minute, right? Because the web of this is more complicated than just Mark Carney and Brookfield.
I mean, it's a great principle, but it's not. If it had been easy, it would have been fixed a long time ago. I mean, since I started in politics in 2004, we've been talking about that. Paul Martin at the time had placed his things in the hands of his kids. We had to defend that over and over, even if the type of business, they all function that way. But when people want to play politics, and I so agree with you, Cheryl, that's what people hate. If it had been simple, it would have been fixed. It's not that simple. if they commit to do something about it, we can't just be Canada doing it. It has to be elsewhere, because otherwise our corporations will not be able to compete. So between the position of the NDP is you have to be cleaner than, and I agree with that, but it's not practical most of the time. There's a middle line, and if everybody can agree, I love the platform that Poilievre presented on tax haven. It's clear, it's a step in the right direction. I don't think the Liberals should push away from it, and I'm not sure they would either, but it's not a priority at this point.